Welcome back to Human Wreckage, the podcast where we peer into the darkest corners of the human psyche, uncovering shattered lives and the wreckage left behind. Today, we're exploring a case that, quite honestly, shocks even the most seasoned true crime followers. It is a case so unexpected, so unnatural, that the question isn't just how it happened, it's why it ever could. This isn't a story of cold, calculated murder. It's not a crime of passion, nor is it one tied to financial gain or revenge. This is the story of a very young child, an innocent baby whose life and death became one of the most disturbing and divisive criminal cases in modernist history. This is the story of China Arnold, a mother convicted of killing her 28-day-old daughter, not with rage-fueled violence, not with poison, not with neglect, but by placing her inside a running microwave oven. It's a case so haunting, it forces us to ask, what happens when psychological chaos, alcohol, emotional immaturity, and broken parental instinct collide in the dark? This is one of the most emotionally difficult episodes we've ever covered. While the details are profoundly upsetting, we will tell this story with the dignity, sensitivity, and empathy it demands. Let's begin. To understand the framework of this case, we begin in Dayton, Ohio, a working-class city with aging brick buildings, wide streets, and a history steeped in both industrial innovation and economic hardship. In the early 2000s, Dayton was a city in transition. Manufacturing jobs had vanished, families struggled with unemployment, poverty, and rising neighborhood crime. The economic decline had ripple effects on stable living situations, increased substance abuse, lack of mental health care, and generational cycles of trauma. It wasn't a place that produced monsters, but it was a place where vulnerabilities could fall through the cracks. And somewhere in this sprawling Midwestern puzzle was China Arnold. China was born March 29, 1980, in Dayton. In school, she was quiet, unremarkable, and never exhibited violent behavior. Friends described her as laid back, sometimes goofy, and not particularly maternal, but not cruel either. She dropped out of high school, worked sporadically convenience stores, fast food, local bars. She began drinking heavily in her late teens. Nothing unusual in a struggling neighborhood. Relationships came and went. Some were turbulent, but nothing that foreshadowed anything like the crime ahead. Then she met Tolly. He was charismatic, easygoing, and street smart. Their relationship was rocky, marked by brief separations, nights of partying, and accusations of infidelity. But most people around them would later say they were unstable, but no worse than plenty of other young, struggling couples. China became pregnant. In May 2005, she gave birth to a little girl. Her name was Tolly. Paris was only 28 days old when she died. She had no voice, no defense, no way to say she was hungry, tired, or hurting. She depended entirely on the adults around her adults who were emotionally immature, intoxicated, and overwhelmed. China and Terrell were living in a small apartment at 3158 Nicholson Drive. They both drank heavily. Friends came and went. The television was always on. Music, alcohol, smoke, arguments the constant background. Paris was often held, yes, but differently. Not with intentional parenting, but with people passing her around during parties, changing her diapers when they remembered. She wasn't so much cared for as she was present. On August 29, 2005, events took a devastating turn. It was a late summer evening in Dayton. The heat lingered in sticky waves. China and Terrell had spent the day drinking. Friends came and went. Some accounts suggest they got into an argument. Others say it was about whether Terrell was really Paris's father. By the time night arrived, everyone was drunk. Tensions were high. There were no screams, no threats of violence, only simmering anger, alcohol, poor judgment, and a microwave. No one saw what happened, or at least not clearly, but something unforgivable occurred. The next morning, Paris was unresponsive. China and Terrell took her to Dayton Children's Medical Center. When asked what happened, they claimed the baby had suddenly collapsed. Doctors couldn't believe what they were seeing. Paris showed signs of exposure to extreme heat, but strangely, there were no external burns, no melted skin, no flame damage. Underneath her skin, however, her internal organs were severely overheated. There was thermal injury inside her abdominal tissues, but not outside. This was not fire, not hot water, not open heat. Medical professionals began to whisper the only possibility that made sense. She'd been microwaved. Police questioned China immediately. She didn't confess. She didn't deny it. She simply said, "I have no idea what happened. I was drunk. I passed out on the couch." But medical findings didn't lie. The baby had suffered exposure to microwave radiation inside a household microwave, and there was only one microwave in that apartment. Only 2 adults had access to it. One was the baby's father, who was asleep on the couch at the time of the alleged heating. The other was the baby's mother. Investigators were disturbed, horrified, but also confused. How do you prove a microwave homicide? There was no precedent, no history of similar cases, no protocol. China was first arrested in September 2005, but released due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors didn't know how to prove it without a confession or eyewitness. Then something unexpected happened. China started telling people, not officially, not to the police, but in jail she spoke. She told fellow inmates that she had put her baby in the microwave because she was angry at Terrell for denying paternity. She admitted it to 3 different prisoners. These women would later testify. China would deny them all. In 2008, the case finally went to trial in Montgomery County. The prosecution argued, Paris died from being placed in a microwave. Only one person had motive, opportunity, and physical ability, China Arnold. China had admitted it to other inmates. She acted out of rage, jealousy, and intoxicated impulse. The defense argued, no physical evidence tied China to the microwave. Those inmates had motives to lie for reduced sentences. No one actually saw her put Paris in the microwave. It might have been another child in the apartment playing with the microwave. Ultimately, the jury didn't believe it. China Arnold was convicted of aggravated murder. She received life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Ohio 2nd District Court of Appeals overturned the conviction. Why? Because prosecutors allowed testimony that was ruled inadmissible. In other words, the trial hadn't been conducted fairly, and so a full retrial was ordered. But this time, it would be even harder. The world now knew about this case. Everyone had an opinion. Was China a monstrous murderer, or a scapegoat in a nearly impossible to prove forensic mystery? In 2011, China Arnold faced her second trial. This time, the prosecution made their case stronger, more structured, more scientific. Pathologists explained precisely how microwaves heat tissues from the inside out. Paris's internal injuries matched exactly what would happen in a microwave exposure scenario. Medical experts testified that no accidental scenario could cause those injuries, not hot bath water, not a fire, not medical mishandling. There was only one possibility. 1. More inmate witnesses spoke. China did not. The jury reached a verdict. Guilty. When sentencing, the judge spoke slowly, deliberately. You placed your baby in a microwave oven and cooked her to death. You showed no true remorse. You robbed her of her life in a way that was both unimaginable and inhuman. China Arnold was again sentenced to life in prison without parole. She would live the rest of her life in the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. This crime doesn't fit cleanly into typical criminal psychology categories. Was it premeditated? No. Was it done out of cold revenge? Not exactly. Experts speculated. Extreme intoxication and impaired judgment played a role. Unresolved anger over paternity arguments. Lack of emotional maturity and coping skills. A possible psychological breakdown. But here's the haunting truth. Even now, no one really knows what was going through her mind, because she is never fully explained. Forensic psychologists have debated this case for years. Was this a woman with deep-seated psychopathy? Or was it a catastrophic impulse decision from an impaired mind never to be repeated? Some noted she had no prior abuse history, no documented psychotic disorder, no evidence of long-term violence. Others pointed out that lack of history doesn't equal lack of capability. And then there's the environment. The alcohol, the instability, the stress, the confusion. Still, no answer satisfies, because nothing can. It's easy to forget that there was another parent here, Tolly. He was never charged. Authorities ruled he had no direct connection to the death. He was sleeping during the time of the incident. He had no motive. And yet he carries a heavy legacy of loss. He lost his daughter. He lost the woman he loved. And he carried the guilt of being present yet powerless. One relative said Terrell still keeps a photo of Paris on his bedside table. This case forced courts, medical professionals, and prosecutors to explore unheard-of forensic territory. It led to new research in microwave-related injuries. It opened discussions about parental mental impairment, intoxication, and impulsive violence. It impacted child protection laws. But beyond these implications, it left behind a question, one that no one can ever answer. How do you measure justice when the victim was a 28-day-old baby? Thank you for joining us for this deeply difficult episode of Human Wreckage. Cases like this aren't about villains. They're about fractures. In people. In judgment. In humanity. Some wreckage is physical, seen in crime scenes, evidence, hospital reports. But some wreckage is emotional. It lingers in the corners of memory. It sits in uncomfortable silence. It changes everyone who hears it, even a little. Join us next week as we uncover another story in the wreckage of the human soul. Until then, stay aware, stay compassionate, and take care of each other.